Right, good evening, coaches. Welcome back to the performance series. Talk 2 is this evening with Jon. We're going to just allow a minute or two for most of the coaches to jump in to the session and connect their audio, and we'll take it from there. So Tracy, I'm going to turn off my side and hand over to you. We've got 10 coaches in. I anticipate another 10, but you can start when you're ready.
Okay, great. Well, Jon, once again, thank you for giving us your time tonight. For those of you that have not been in the loop with going on swimming, Jon has recently been elected the president of the World Coaches Association. And he has a doctorate in psychology, which, am I right, Jon, that's right?
Yeah, that's right.
Doctorate in psychology. Okay, so Jon is going to be chatting to us about psychological elements that are affecting our athletes these days. We're looking forward to this chat. I think it's something that a lot of us need to be mindful of in the background. I keep saying this, but Jon, coaches here in South Africa, we need to wear many hats. We don't have the resources that the big international first teams kind of have. And we need to be sort of generalists in as many areas as possible, including travel agents.
We appear to have lost Tracy there on her audio. So we'll just wait for her to come back. But Jon, I think then we can just hand over to you, and you can start with your presentation. And when Tracy hops back in, she'll carry on her conversation. All right, thanks, Jon.
No problem. Let's see if we can get this to work. Can someone tell me they can hear me okay?
Yeah, yes, we can hear you fine.
Yeah.
Great, okay. So look, guys, thanks ever so much for inviting me to come and speak to you this, well, for me, it's this evening. I don't think our time difference is too different. I was asked to speak on something which I haven't really spoken on before in terms of a formal presentation. So this was a good thing for me, because it really made me focus and challenge myself as to what I wanted to talk through with you guys. And the topic title, I don't know if it's the right one, but it certainly captures what it is that I'm gonna try and talk about, particularly as we've been through a period, and you would say are still in a period that has been unprecedented, highly traumatic, something we may never see again, but you never say never with these things. But I think that the demands that it's placed on our athletes, on our coaches, on our swimming programs, our clubs, and our national governing bodies to be able to come through this with something that's still recognizable as to what we had before. It's been highly challenging. And there's no textbook on how you deal with a worldwide pandemic in any regard, and certainly not one in how a sport, a coach's career, an athlete's swimming career, a love of a sport can be rescued and maintained. So I think that we're probably all better people because of a pandemic in terms of things that we've had to achieve and had to consider. You just wouldn't want a worldwide pandemic that killed so many people to actually make us better people, but that's a different story. So this is a preview of some of the areas that I'm going to discuss with you today. And what I'm absolutely happy to do is take questions as we go along, rather than people save up their questions to the end. But if you want to save up questions till the end, that'll be fine too, because we'll we'll inevitably have some time then to be able to do that. But if you have a question, then please do throw it in as we go along, so that it's relevant to the piece of the conversation that we're having. So to give you a preview on that, which I'm going to go through, I'm going to talk through a concept that I call the health package, and how that's more relevant today than maybe ever before. I'm going to talk about some findings that have actually been taken from athletes who've been surveyed. I'm going to talk around the team around the athlete that's always been there, but how it's maybe now more important than ever it was. I'm going to talk a little bit about what makes world-class environments. And you'll see that I'll talk about world-class environments make world-class people, but it's world-class people that make world-class environments. And the nature of world-class environments is what's going to hold our sport together and maintain our people in the sport. I'm going to talk a little bit about managing anxiety. I'm going to talk around some female-specific issues that I think are important, because I think that females have got some areas of need that sometimes we don't necessarily recognize as coaches, and doesn't mean that males don't have any specific areas of need, but I think there's some female-specific things that we need to consider with our athletes. I'm going to talk a little around coach-athlete relationships. Again, something that's always been there, but now how they're even more essential in terms of their power to maintain and retain athletes in our sport. And then a concept of what superpowers are available to us. That's a glib comment. But what I'm going to call superpowers that are available to us in our daily coaching practice and our daily coaching language, that's potentially going to help. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about coach mental health, because it's an area that often doesn't get mentioned around these things. That is because we're athlete centric, and so we should be. And we're the nature of what we do puts athletes first, means that sometimes we lose track of looking after ourselves or looking after each other. And I'll talk a little bit about that too. So that gives you a preview of the content across this next 50 minutes or so. So let's talk about this concept of the full health package. And the World Health Organization in particular tells us that to be truly healthy, there are 3 key elements to holistic health. And that if any of these areas are missing or not present in an individual, we can't consider that athlete to be healthy or that person. And so these areas would fall into the domains of physical health, the notion of being physically fit, fit to be able to perform that which would be a daily task for us. And in the case of athletes, that would be the capability of performing their sporting task. And physical health is potentially the area that's least challenging for us to maintain with our athletes. The nature of what we do on a day-to-day basis is ostensibly and primarily focused around that area of physical health. The second area would be that of emotional or mental health. This is very much about a person's personal well-being, and that they have confidence and that they're feeling positive about themselves and about their life and about that with which they engage. And so there would be a number of areas that would be brought into that when we talk about confidence and feeling positive. That would involve school, that would involve university, to an extent it would involve family, it would certainly involve the swimming program, if it's particularly if it's their primary or their only sport in which they're engaged. And the final piece, and I think this is the one that gets talked about the least, is that of social health. And that's where a person has a general feeling of optimism, of looking forward to the next day, looking forward to the afternoon when it's the morning, looking forward to the weekend, looking forward to going to school or looking forward to going to work, looking forward to going to training, looking forward to competitions. That if they're primarily looking forward to aspects in their life rather than dreading or not looking forward to aspects of their life, and that their interactions and their relationships within that area are strong, then they would consider to have social health. Now, we can see that if we talk about the recent pandemic, all three of those areas would have been heavily challenged. It was difficult to keep athletes physically fit. It was difficult to keep them feeling confident and positive, because for a lot of that period of time, we didn't know what was going to happen. And we'd not experienced anything like that before. And it was difficult to maintain interactions and relationships and feel optimistic, particularly when people were being told not to spend time with each other. And my comment at the bottom is that it's immediately apparent that the coach has a major role to play in all of these areas, and will absolutely either be a positive or a negative influence within each. Now, none of us would set out to be a negative influence within any of those areas. But if we don't know that some of those areas even exist, or that those areas are even important, and between those three areas create this full and holistic health package that's the utopian situation for us and our athletes, then we might be a negative influence on those areas without even knowing. So in explicitly stating that these areas are important and that they provide us with this notion of a full health package, we can then start to work on a day-to-day basis within our profession in each of those areas. Now, let's move on to the post-pandemic challenges that are related to this. The first thing that we have to ask ourselves is, people are already talking about post-pandemic, and I would actually challenge whether we are in a post-pandemic era. We're certainly in a lot of nations in a softer era of pandemic. We know that Omicron, generally speaking, causes less people to be seriously ill and causes less people to end up in hospital, and therefore potentially less people will die with it. But there's a larger number of people who are contracting it. In the UK at the moment, as an example, 1 in 23 people have COVID, and 65% of those people had COVID prior to having it recently. So the nature of post-pandemic maybe is a false confidence. What I would actually suggest is that we're in an era of post-serious pandemic, and even that might come back and bite me as a statement. So bumps in the road may still very well occur. We don't know if there's going to be new variants from what we've experienced recently. We're being told that we're potentially in the 11th hour of this being a serious challenge to our lives. But again, we won't know for sure until time tells us. So my first point here is, let's not get caught up too readily and too easily that this is over. We already know that FINA are considering moving their World Championships this year. They may already have considered, they just haven't been explicit in saying it. And that would be for no other reason other than COVID. So its impact on our lives is still there. In terms of post-pandemic challenges, if we look back at one of those key parts of the health package, the emotional and mental health side of things, there is absolutely no health without mental health. And it's an area that hasn't been addressed or looked at or spoken about openly until very recently. There's been stigma and an aura around it that hasn't been one of openness. But I would absolutely say it's very difficult for anybody to be considered to be healthy if they don't have strong mental health. And so this is a key factor in these post-pandemic times. And we're seeing that with athletes. We're seeing that with athletes younger than ever before, who are dealing with anxiety or signs of depression that maybe we wouldn't ever have recognized in people of such an age 10 or 20 years ago. And there's no doubt that recent times have been a factor in that. We also have to recognize that athletes are not ordinary. They are extraordinary people. They do not live ordinary lives. We know what an ordinary life looks like. They certainly don't engage in that. And because they don't live in what we would consider, or society would consider, to be an ordinary lifestyle, they experience additional mental health risk factors just by implication. Just because they live an extraordinary life with additional commitments to competition, training, a more stressful lifestyle of success and failure, or at least in their own heads, parental pressure, and still needing to fit half a pint into a half pint pot when it comes to school life or university life, social life, family engagements, and so on. Their life is so much more stressful. And so, although we can't say, therefore, they will all have mental health problems, what we can say is that they are more prone to mental health risk factors. And again, in my final statement on this slide, uncertainties that are related to the pandemic have clearly added to what are already high regular stress levels within our athletes. Uncertainty is not over yet. And the one thing that athletes do not like, generally speaking, is uncertainty. We all know how much they love getting the season plan, to get the weekly training plan, to know when their meets are, to know where they're traveling to get to their competitions, when they've got training camps. They love that weeks and weeks, months and months in advance. What the pandemic has prevented us from doing is giving them that very thing that they hold dear, that provides them with stability to be able to operate regularly on a daily basis. Now, some of this information is quite alarming, and I don't think that it's out there enough. But this is information that was taken from athletes that competed at the 2019 World Championships, the long course World Championships in Guangzhou. So the summer of 2019, not that long ago. The first context I want to give to you before we look at this information is that it was our most recent World Championships, most recent World Championships to date. And that they, because of when this took place, it was almost immediately pre-pandemic. If we consider that the pandemic started to creep into the news around November 2019, and then we would only really consider that it started to take a grip of society in January 2020. The fact that this competition took place in the summer of 2019 is very, very close to us knowing that the pandemic was something that was coming along. So if we consider that some of these outcomes are quite alarming and that we're maybe unaware of them, think about how much more these maybe would have been had these questions been asked during a pandemic. So the three things that stood out for me in this survey that was conducted by FINA were that over 25% of athletes that took part in the World Championships in 2019 were classified from their results as being depressed. They had an actual classification of depression. Over 33%, so over a third of them, were identified as having an eating disorder. And over 40% stated that they wanted or needed psychological support for mental health issues. Not just psychological support for dealing with the pressure of racing or preparing to compete at the highest level, but for mental health issues. And those three things really stood out for me. And so if coaches brush mental health under the carpet, they do so at their peril. Because if this was what we were dealing with before the pandemic, we can only guess as to how much that's been amplified during. And what's absolutely clear is that sporting environments such as ours can either nourish or malnourish an athlete's mental health. We either help it or we make it worse, depending on our behaviors and our environment. It's highly unlikely that we don't do anything to it. We either affect it positively or negatively, but I doubt that our sporting environment just maintains homeostasis. Now, the world already had a problem with young people and partaking in physical activity well in advance of this pandemic hitting us. This research that was conducted in the Netherlands, and it was published in 2017, shows quite alarming statistics around the average hours of children playing outside, not playing, but playing outside. Now, there are factors around safety and all of those kind of things in 21st century life that we maybe would consider as part of this. But in 1985, the average child was playing 30 hours outside per week, 1,500 hours outside per year, and 15,000 hours of playing in that decade. 20 years later, you can see what happened to those figures. So in 2005, there's a dramatic difference there. The rise of the internet, the rise of electronic games, the rise of watching TV through streaming, but also parental concerns around safety will all be considerable factors in there. Now, the results for 2015 were due to be published, but I can't find them anywhere. And I've actually contacted these people to see if they have the 2015 results, because I can't believe that in 2022 they don't have them. But at this moment in time, they're to be confirmed. I don't expect to see a trend back towards 1985. I expect to see something similar to 2005 or something worse. Now, these are alarming figures, particularly when we consider the physical, mental, social health holistic package, that holistic health package we talked about at the beginning. If physical health is a key part of that, then the regular child who's not involved in our swimming program or in something similar is putting their holistic health in jeopardy. So there was already a problem before the pandemic. Now, one of the areas that I'm now going to talk about in terms of solutions or management tools for helping this, the first one would be the team around the athlete. Now, you'd all say to me, well, this was already there, John, when you read this. And you're right. What I'm now going to put across to you is, if this wasn't there, or it was fragile and broken, then that needs looking at. And if it is there, then its importance needs amplifying, and it needs maybe formalizing to ensure that the components of the team around the athlete are working hand in glove to ensure that the athlete is getting the very best level of service that they can, that's going to give them that holistic health package. So the members of the team are the lead coach or the head coach, any assistant coaches that are working with that athlete as well. Sports science and sports medicine practitioners that may be involved with athletes, could be a gym coach, could be a physiotherapist, any people in that area. This is where we trip up. We sometimes then don't consider that the parents or the immediate family, or with an older athlete, their partner, are members of that team, but they are, and they have to be. Because if we don't engage with them, they can be damaging, because they maybe don't work in alignment with agreed principles of how we can do the very best by a particular athlete or group of athletes. The school or the university for young people who are still in full-time or part-time education are also essential elements of this, because again, if they don't understand, then they can bring stress and anxiety factors to the table that are just unnecessary, particularly as they would absolutely consider themselves, in 99% of the cases, to be more important than the swimming program, their education. So of course they're most important in their eyes. And for most of us, we would consider that to be true too. But we need them to feel important as part of a team and not important as part of a silo. And then there'll be other socialization influences within an athlete's life. For instance, if they have a particular religious connotation within their lives, maybe a church or something similar, might have an influence too. And there'll be other examples of that, of youth clubs or things that they might be involved in. But this is a multidisciplinary team. Everybody has an area of expertise in this, or an area of knowledge. Even if they're not experts, they'll have an area of knowledge and information that they can bring to the table. It has fluid barriers, and each person has an area of expertise, of responsibility that they need to take ownership of and bring to the table in terms of looking after athletes. If anyone is intending to encroach in other areas, that's fine because it's fluid, but there has to be consultation in that area. Your parents don't want to find that a swimming coach has phoned up a school and spoken to a teacher or a head of year around something to do with an academic program without the parents knowing that that was going to be the case. Parents would have a right to know that. So it's not that the coach has done the wrong thing. They've maybe just gone about it in the wrong way. This team is fragile. It's easily damaged. It absolutely relies on trust and integrity, and is very difficult to repair once it's broken. And you can already see that from a number of those areas that are listed, people would be very precious around the part that they have to play in this. And the more successful the athlete, the more precious they become, because everybody would like a piece of reflected glory. So it's really important that this is considered and that coaches don't run away from this. Because these are the areas that some of the areas I've identified, and I've called this where fools fear to tread. Only foolish coaches want no parental involvement with the athlete. Now, that doesn't mean that we want the parents running the swimming program or making decisions around the athletes swimming. But the smart coaches engage with the parents and bring them in to be part of the team, rather than hold them at arm's length and try not to engage with them and hope that things will work. But likewise, only foolish parents hire a professional and then believe that they can do their job better than they can. We see those parents all the time. And I always find it remarkable that our sport seems to give them some kind of license of expertise in these areas when they've got no professional qualification and maybe no child that's been through the sport before. They wouldn't stand over the piano teacher who's teaching their child how to play the piano and tell them which keys to press. But they seem to think that they have some level of expertise in our sport a lot of the time. So we need to manage that. We can't just get hot-headed about it. We have to manage it. That's where we need guile and skill and subtlety and diplomacy. And not a lot of swimming coaches necessarily have that. Now, poor coaching can and should be challenged by parents. If they believe that the service that they're paying for isn't good enough, then I believe they have a right to challenge it. But for exactly the same reason, poor parenting can be challenged by the coach. Certainly poor athletic parenting, not providing the right meals, athletes constantly turning up late, parents not helping athletes manage homework and schoolwork so that it's done on time, parents being late with meet entries, all of those kind of things. So it's a two-way street. But if as coaches, you're not doing a good enough job and you're just sending kids up and down without coaching them, you're just training them and keeping their time occupied, you can expect to be challenged too, and quite rightly so. I also believe that only foolish athletes that they can get better by staying in their comfort zone. Now, they've certainly been out their comfort zone in recent times through COVID, but now that they've got used to lying on the sofa a little bit more in an evening rather than going swimming training, maybe because our pools have been closed, or they've got used to not getting up till 7:30 in the morning just to go to school rather than getting up at 5:30 a.m. to go training. We've got to find a way to gently coax them back out of what has become a revised comfort zone into what used to be regular life. But in some cases, because pools were closed for so long in certain nations, it was no longer regular. And it's a bit of a challenge for us. The other thing is, only foolish athletes think that tomorrow is the time to truly get started. And although they know tomorrow is not the right time, because tomorrow turns into the day after and it turns into the day after again, they'll find reasons in their head to persuade themselves that that's okay, for exactly the same reasons that they'll persuade themselves that they should start exam revision tomorrow and not today. And then it becomes next week. And then it becomes the night before the exam. They'll find reasons, because human beings are corner cutters and shortcutters by nature. It's what separates us out from the rest of the animal kingdom, at least in one sense, is that our default is to find the softest, easiest, quickest way to do anything. And so if athletes think that tomorrow is the time to get started, or they can persuade themselves, then they will. But last but not least, we have to remember that athletes are human beings first and not athletes first. And they need to believe in everyone that's on their team. So it's a coach's job to keep these people who are on the multidisciplinary team together and warm and happy and content to be part of this team. And that's a skill that if we don't have, we have to develop, and we have to develop it quickly. Never more importantly than in recent times has what I'll call a world-class environment. But a world-class environment tends to suggest on the face that this is about producing Olympians and world champions. It isn't. You can have a world-class environment that teaches 4-year-olds how to swim. A world-class environment is the environment in which people can be the best version of themselves. And world-class environments produce world-class people, and world-class people produce world-class environments. So it's a chicken and egg situation. But what's absolutely true is the more world-class people that are working in your environment, the more layers that are put upon the onion, and the bigger the onion grows. So first of all, I'll say the world-class environment is absolutely not about your pool or your gym. It doesn't matter how shiny your pool or your gym is. It doesn't matter how special this new pool might be, or how old your pool is, and whether it's falling apart a little bit. The bricks and mortar, the fabric of the building, they're just the beginning. They can have a little bit of a wow factor when you walk through the door, or the opposite. But ultimately, it's going to be about you and your colleagues and the environment that you create. The aura, the atmosphere, the way that it feels, the gut instinct. This is what we need now for these young people that have been affected over this last 2 years. This is what they're looking for. They're looking for a reason to walk back through the door. And it isn't whether your pool is nice and new. It isn't whether your gym is shiny. It's about what you create. So the world-class environment is your people. And your people have to have collective ambition and collective understanding. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But this is about alignment. This is about everybody delivering the same message of why people would want to be involved with you and your program, even if they might deliver it a different way. People can deliver the same message with different styles, but we must sing from the same hymn sheet. And a world-class environment has values and beliefs that we would believe in, or we'd be mad not to believe in them. The things that we would all want for ourselves, that we'd all want for our children, and we'd all want for our grandchildren. And there needs to be aligned and understood clear lines of expectation. With expectation comes consequence. That's either good consequence or negative consequence. That's either if you do this, this good stuff happens to you. If you don't do this, or you break our values and beliefs, then stuff happens to you that maybe you wouldn't like, and it helps bring you back into line. But we know that all great environments do that, whether that's work, whether that's school, whether that's university, whether that's family. And that there's a holistic buy-in. So those key groups, the staff who work within the program, whether they're paid or volunteers, the athletes themselves, the families of the athletes who put the athletes in your trust and care, and whatever governance you have, whether that's a committee or a board within your swimming program. Everybody believes in those values. They're clear, they're transparent, they're understood, and people join because of them. And what they don't do is they don't join and then try and change them because they don't like them. Now, I'll talk about culture because it's a huge buzzword in sport. And it's a huge buzzword across any establishment that believes itself or wants itself to be successful. Culture is the way we do things around here. The way we do things around here. So when people talk about the culture, it's the way that things are done, and it's what draws people in and either makes them want to stay or makes them think, I don't want to be here. Ultimately, great culture turns into great quiddity. And quiddity is the way we do things around here because it's an extra layer. So it's that the reason that things are done rather than just do them because we say. So I believe that all swimming programs to help athletes over this hiccup, this massive hiccup that they've had for 18 months, 2 years, is to ensure that we've got quiddity, so that not only do they know why, do they know what it is that the program's about, but they know the reasons why. And with knowledge of why, they can engage better and buy into it more. So where do you fit? What is your role in that? Do you add value to this? The answer is yes, you should do, but the real answer should be yes, you do. And if you question yourself around that a little, there's a point of reflection for you there. This is a super simple diagram that I use quite often to talk about how we create great culture and quiddity within a program. And this is super important in 2022 and 2023 as we all try and rescue our sport, we try and rescue our swimming programs, we try and rescue the athletes that have committed to our sport. So it shows that there's a relationship between certainty and agreement. So if you look on the left-hand vertical axis, the degree of agreement is there between high and low. We agree what's happening, or we don't agree what's happening, and there's a range in between. Across the horizontal axis, there's the degree of certainty. We know what's happening, or we don't know or understand what is happening, high and low. You can see where the degree of certainty and the degree of agreement is high, that where they meet as high, we're able to plan and control, we're able to manage. So when we talk about anxiety and stress levels and worry in our athletes, where they know what's happening and they agree with what's happening, as do other members of the multidisciplinary team, we can plan, control, manage. Now, the more one or both of those moves away from high, less certainty, less agreement, we get into a zone of complexity. That is where anxiety occurs. And anxiety is something that's not pleasant for anybody that's experienced it. And not knowing or not agreeing means that we either have people stay within our program, but they're doing it more out of habit than wanting to be there, or they leave our program and they go and swim somewhere else, or they leave our sport and take up a different sport. All three of those are things that we clearly want to avoid. And if we get to really low levels of certainty and low levels of agreement, we've got chaos. We haven't even got a program. We've just got some water time with some people in it and nobody really knowing what's going on. So these are areas that you as coaches, I believe, can work with athletes on that can control generic anxiety amongst them. That if we go back to the physical, emotional, and mental and social health, these are things that can help them in all those areas, because we can identify how nutrition and hydration and sleep and rest can improve physical health. We can identify how all three can improve emotional and mental health. We can see how all three, particularly education and academics, and to an extent nutrition and hydration, can improve social health. And they're controllable. All three are controllable. They sit within the athlete's domain. They sit within the multidisciplinary team's domain. They don't rely on competitors or others to get it right or to make mistakes. So for nutrition and hydration, it is more than a what we eat or drink. It's a why. It's an education piece, and then it's a when we eat during the day, and it's a how frequent. And away from training or periods of time where goodness knows, let's hope this doesn't happen again. If we end up back with some pools closed temporarily because the pandemic gets worse again, then this becomes really important, because eating while you're training and eating maybe while you're not training as frequently are two completely different things. But there's a control element there of things that athletes can focus on and believe that they're doing something positive towards their performance, even when they're not at the training pool. The second piece around sleep and rest. We know that nighttime sleep hours are a challenge, particularly if we've got early morning training taking place and evening training taking place maybe a little bit later than we would hope or anticipate. So power napping, when possible, becomes really important. And maybe that's something that we can talk to the school about. The use of afternoons off or evenings off, weekends, and so on. And self-discipline around blue light, around iPads and phones and laptops and TVs, of when blue light should stop so that nighttime sleep hours can be gained from most significantly. And how this can work with the school so that as much time as possible during the school day can be functional, so that it allows athletes to rest and recuperate during time off away from training are super important. So controllable things that can help in all aspects of health. And last but not least, controllable their education program. We have to accept as swim coaches that the future of over 99.9% of our athletes will be determined by their success in their education, not by their success in the swimming pool. So we have to agree that this is something that is of primary importance. But we can have a lifestyle priority agreement with our athletes and with families around, well, look, we've got no problem with you putting education at number one, but ideally, we'd like you to put swimming at number two. We want that to be as close to number one as possible. And we have no problems with family and seeing grandparents and so on as being, they're at number two with swimming. But we want a huge gap, if possible, between number two and whatever number 4, 5, and 6 are, in terms of social life or whatever else. And so we can plan and work with athletes around them ensuring and understanding that education and academics are important and that we don't want something to affect it. We also really don't want their lack of discipline around education and schoolwork to affect their swimming either. Controllable and can help control anxiety, because what we do find with a lot of anxious athletes is if they're anxious, when they're in the pool, they're anxious about school at the time when they can do nothing about it. And at school, they're often anxious about swimming at the time that there's nothing they can do about it. So compartmentalizing those and encouraging them and educating them to focus on being in the moment and deal with what's in front of you can really help with that generic anxiety. Now, there are some inevitable anxieties that come along, and you can prepare for these transparently by having clear policies on this. And athletes love this too, more so than ever right now. My view is if athletes are injured, they can still attend. If an athlete's got a sore shoulder, they can do kick. If an athlete's got a sore knee, they can do pull, and the world in between. But communication's key here. They talk to you, parents talk to you, and the interventions are given an expected timescale of, we're not just going to hope that this injury goes away. We're going to do something proactively to put it right and to help you get back into some form of full training quickly. Secondly, my view is if they're ill, they do not attend, because quite often an illness is infectious. So not only is it good for their own health, but it's good for other people's that they don't attend. But communication's key again. They don't just go missing with illness without telling you. You set a policy and a protocol around that. Again, what's the intervention? What's the expected timescale? There's medical advice being sought. And also through your attendance register, you should look at whether this is reoccurring. Is this something that happens at a particular time in the year? Does that tell you something about lifestyle at that time? Does it tell you that there are additional anxieties at that time that are being called illness. And last but not least, if athletes are in examination periods, public school examinations that are inevitable, and there is an inevitable as death and taxes, then we modify the training program. Communication's key yet again. Doing this early, planning well in advance, the moment examination timetables are known, agree a schedule and attempt to protect that which is most crucial in the training pool, because everything in the exam hall is crucial. So we've got 3 areas there that are inevitable, but by working proactively rather than reactively as coaches, we can reduce anxiety around these things when they happen, because they all happen. Can other sports help, or do they hinder? And it's the million-dollar question where there isn't a right or wrong answer. But I think it's important that we all look at what the considerations are, and we form our own broad and balanced, proportional understanding of what our state of play is here. And I think the less developed and the younger the athlete, the more we're in the positive considerations. And the more developed and the higher performing the athlete, maybe the more we look at the negative considerations. Where that line is and where that line moves, that's very difficult to say, and that's on an individual basis. But in terms of positive considerations that help athletes with mental state, it helps them with generic athlete development. We know that just swimming doesn't necessarily produce great athletes, it just produces great swimmers. So the involvement of other sport and physical activity is really important here. There are social and emotional aspects to play in other sports, because other sports have communication at the heart of them, and swimming, other than during rest intervals in training or sitting together at meets, doesn't. So if we consider that social health is an important part of the package of health, then this is a consideration for us. If swimming's their big thing, other sports can feel less serious, and they're more around fun and frivolity than an outcome and a performance. And they can also foster good relations with the school. If you're asking the school for concessions around your athlete in terms of start times, finish times, times away for competitions, can they get a sleep at break time or lunchtime? Is there any way that we can get them some extra food? Can they snack during lessons? Can they drink during lessons? Whatever it might be, if you're looking for a win, then this might be an area in which you can give something back. The negative considerations, of course, are whether we like it or not, swimming is an early specialization sport if we want to try and be the best that we can be in that. And that means that there's time constraints on any young person's life with the amount of swimming and related activity that we would like them to do at certain points in their swimming lives. The timing of the day for school sports doesn't necessarily work with our swimming calendar or our swimming timetable, and that's something that we need to consider too. There's joint protection issues with swimmers, even with what maybe looks like a simple activity where there isn't contact. The hitting of a tennis ball and a shoulder or an elbow is damaged just because it's something that's irregular, and swimming has maybe weakened that area in terms of what it can do in other aspects of life. Then that's something we have to consider. And there's an injury prevalence, of course, in contact sports, rugby and soccer and hockey. We're more likely to see the athlete out the pool than we are with other sports. Last but not least, swimmers are tired, and they're tired a lot of the time, and that this will bring additional fatigue, most likely physical fatigue rather than emotional fatigue, but it's going to bring fatigue to the table. And we might already be talking to schools about where non-examination physical education takes place, whether that can be reduced or taken away because the athlete is so involved in health type activities on a weekly basis that that's not necessary, as opposed to a more regular child who wouldn't have swimming in their lives. So they're the areas that we've got to consider. But the positive considerations versus the negative considerations are even more in the limelight now as we try and encourage our athletes back into the pool, and as we we're more acutely aware of how we've got to look after their mental health as much as we do their physical. Now, when we talk about mental health, we're often talking about the unseen, because physical injury we can quite often see. But if we see poor mental health as the equivalent of injury, but mental injury in inverted commas, it's difficult to establish how we can work positively towards this unless we have an environment of sharing and an environment of discussion. So if we were to look on a broad brush, physical injury seems to be a lot easier to discuss. There's no stigma around that physical injury. People talk about it openly, but mental challenges are inherently harder to open up about. The taboo in this area has to be broken, and it has to be made safe for people to be able to discuss this, and to be able to discuss this openly without people prejudicing it in some way. In the 70s and the 80s in particular, we would have worked through a be tough culture where we would push through the pain and be tough. And because of that, that hasn't helped with the stigma of openly discussing mental health, because that wouldn't be seen in that era as being tough. It would be seen as being weak. And so the term mental toughness that sometimes we may have used in our coaching pasts, it does not help, as the implied opposite of that is mental weakness. And so that doesn't encourage anybody to want to discuss any issues that they might be having in terms of mental challenges. And it's not changing the way that we think. It's just improving the way that we think. We don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater in the way that we think here. We just need to turn the dial a little and think about how we address these matters and make them safe. So last but not least, we need to stimulate openness and honesty. The use of role models who share in this area are really, really important. There are so many high-level, world-leading athletes out there that have spoken openly in this domain, as are top musicians and top actors, that a lot of these guys would use as role models in their day-to-day lives. They speak frankly in this area, so we can use that as a means to break a stigma down. We have to show support and listening skills. Anything that's mentionable is manageable. Anything that's mentionable is manageable. Anything that can be spoken openly about can be managed. There needs to be clarity that people who have a willingness to speak are not alone, and that it's not unusual to feel this way. At the moment, it's just too unusual to speak openly about it. And sharing creates informal education through curiosity, because the more people speak, the more people are curious about this area, the more they'll read and research and understand, and more the stigma will be broken down. Here's another area as to how we help manage stress and pressure amongst younger athletes, amongst our age groupers, particularly stress and pressure that might be indirectly put upon them by overambitious and overzealous parents. If we look down the left-hand side of this table, these are the age groups in which the top 100 times in all events were swum. And to the right, in the two genders, we've got the percentage of the top 100 swimmers who were still top 100 or became top 100 at the age of 17 or 18 years of age. So you'll see of those that were top 100 and of all times in all events at 10 and under, only 7.4% and 5.8% of those athletes in females and males became top 100 or remained top 100 at the age of 17, 18 years. 11, 12 years, it's not much better. And even at 15, 16 years, it's around about half. If you swam a top 100 time in 15, 16 years, then only half of those athletes are there at 17, 18 years. So for the parents that have got their stopwatches out and are super keen for their child to be a county or a regional or or a district champion at 10 and under, and have got bragging rights with their neighbours and all of that kind of thing. This kind of information can really help control that, because the opposite can sometimes be true. The kid who's 25th in the regional meet at 10 and under might be getting lambasted in the car on the way home from parents, but sometimes it's not a bad thing that they're 25th, because the next year they're 20th, and then the year after they're 15th, and they're the ones that sometimes are the ones that break through. So this is an athlete and a parent education piece that can help reduce stress and pressure amongst athletes way too early. I also believe that we have an opportunity to empower athletes with authenticity. By authenticity, I mean these four things. You, the you is the athlete. You are accountable for your own actions and behaviors. You do what you need to do and worry less about what others are doing that might be different. You are the primary instrument in making yourself better, that controllable thing again. And you must seek the support and the guidance that can help you action this. So there's three areas there that are about you are in control. And the fourth one is, but where you don't feel fully in control, you've got the support and the guidance here to help you. And so we can put those other three things right if they're not right. I don't see any questions at the moment, so I'll carry on and we'll see if we've got questions in the end. And I would expect to finish in the next 10 minutes or so. So there are some generic considerations.
I'm not picking up any questions or concerns. Just a lot of people are having audible issues, but I don't think it's on your side or mine. I think it's maybe South Africa. But yeah, we carry on. Okay.
So there are some generic considerations that I think are individual to our female athletes. And there's some good news here, and then there's some tricky news that we need to work through. So the good news for coaches is that, and again, please, these are generic, right? This is a very broad brush. Females can work harder for longer. Females require less rest, and females are more of an aerobic animal. So they're often by far and away the best kids to coach for long periods of time, if in fact, maybe for their whole swimming careers, for all of these reasons. Females also, we have to consider their chronological age versus their biological age, i.e. the age that's on their passport compared to their swimming age. And for many years, and I still believe this to be the case, you know, a 12-year-old girl and a 14-year-old boy are kind of the same animal. Females for so long are so far in advance of their male counterparts who would be born in the same year. And that's, again, not holistically true, but it's generically true. And we also know that females can truly compete in a senior environment sooner. We know, you know, in South Africa for sure, 15, 16-year-old girls can win Olympic medals. We don't really see that in 15, 16-year-old boys. But there's some tougher news that we have to work on, and where we have to really metaphorically put our arms around them at certain times. Again, the research tells us that the propensity to drop out of the sport around key education periods is higher in females than it is in males. Females tend to have a higher regard for their education at those key education times than their male counterparts do. Females also have challenges, many of them do, in their adolescent years around weight management and body composition, regardless of how much they're training. And they'll need support and guidance through that time. And last but not least, females have to deal with the onset of womanhood and then deal with that on a monthly basis. And all males would have to deal with maturity factors too, and areas of changing from a boy to a man. That you wouldn't say that they're anywhere near as significant as the challenges that our young ladies have to deal with. So again, these are areas that should be on our minds all of the time, but are maybe really quite acute at this moment in time too. And so I'm going to complete things with a little bit around athlete-coach relationship, a little bit around coach mental health, and then a summary. I believe that there are three key phases in an athlete-coach relationship. In phase one, we're in what I would term to be the dependent years. This is with the young age grouper, where they're highly dependent on what the coach says and does. They don't have a great deal of opinion or experience, and the coach can be quite didactic in their style, informative, instructional, and there will be a level of obediency from an athlete simply because of their age and the awe factor of, I am a young child, you are an adult. Default is I do as I'm told and do as you say. They're great and easy years to coach in. Now, we then get into phase 2. And with most adolescents, this is the trickiest period. And my experience tells me that we move into the independent years, where just as a young person maybe deals with their parents in the same way, they suddenly know everything. And they suddenly have an opinion on everything. And they're suddenly highly experienced. And they wouldn't know that they're not, because at that moment in time, they actually really feel that they are. And suddenly all of the things that you've been telling them to do, some of those are wrong. And they're wrong because they think and say so, and that's good enough for them. And if we get stuck in this phase as a coach, we have a real problem, because this is loss of athlete to the program or loss of athlete to the sport time. So we have to be really smart in this area. We have to coax, we have to nudge, we have to cajole, we have to sometimes agree. And even if we don't agree, sometimes we just have to nod our heads and do the very best that we can, even though we know through experience that we're probably right. There's a little bit of concession sometimes that we have to give. Now, if we get past phase 2, we get to phase 3, which is the most glorious of times to be working with an athlete. And these are the interdependent years, but only if we get there, only if we're coaching smart enough to get through phase 2. This is where discussion and liaison, partnership, and the sharing of opinions means that we're a true coaching team. We're still the prime mover in this area because we still have the most experience, the most knowledge, and we have formal education that allows us to do our jobs. We're the professionals. But at this stage, the athlete is also an expert on themselves. And as long as they have integrity and we can trust them to tell us that what is the case is truly the case, then why would we not want to listen to them? Because they tell us things that we wouldn't otherwise know and might be unique to them. And so we have to understand that to get through phase 2, the worst form of listening is preparing to speak. Because often our default as a coach, when an athlete is telling us their opinion, is not to listen, but it's to prepare the retort of how we're going to tell them how they're wrong and we're right. Because athletes mature and develop, we as coaches must be in advance of that. It's like a game of chess where we're always one move ahead. And we educate away from the selfish concept of it's my medal if it's right, it's our problem if things start to go wrong, and it's your solution if things really aren't working well. What we need the athlete to talk about is it's our medal. When it's a problem, it's our problem. And when the backs are against the wall, it's our solution. And our is the key word to get in there. And I'll mention about superpowers. And the coaching of self-regulation and self-control with our athletes are those superpowers. And this is the devil and the angel talking on your shoulder. Superpower 1, the notion of self-regulation that we can bring into our coaching language, is an awareness of and managing your own thoughts. It's identifying how those thoughts influence our behavior. The voice in our head, how does it influence our behavior? And that we change our responses, we adapt to the current demands of our life, that the thoughts in our head and the voice in our head changes according to what's taking place. And if we self-regulate well, we administer our thoughts and actively shape our behaviors accordingly. We can use self-regulation or some of this terminology within our sessions, within our day-to-day language with our athletes, so it becomes part of their makeup. The second superpower is that of self-control. Now, this is resisting temptations that conflict with our goals. the nights out, the large slices of cake, the consumption of alcohol, the not getting enough sleep. All of those things are things that conflict with an athlete's goals. So talking about self-control and how self-control can have an impact on performance, well, it's by implication, it's controllable because it's self-control. So it can deal with anxiety and it can certainly deal with disappointment. So we control our behaviors to align with our targets. We can't control much in our lives, but we can, in many respects, control ourselves. Now, the interaction of self-regulation and self-control together are both some superpowers that interact to support the goals that we want to attain. They're both within our control. We regulate, we control. Self-regulation directs our thoughts and feelings. Self-control inhibits those impulses that would sabotage that we want to achieve. And in the challenging world in which we currently live, we can use these terms within our coaching to aid those who are in our care, because I think that they're relatively simple to understand. You can bring this in with 10, 11, 12-year-old swimmers as part of your daily language, as long as you use the right kind of terminology, and it'll resonate with them. And so last but not least, what of coach mental challenges? Because I don't know that enough people talk about this. We're very athlete-centric. So because coaches strive to provide an enjoyable and healthy experience for athletes, it's really important that this is considered. But often the way that we approach our job is a manner which has the opposite effect on their own well-being, because we put others first. Serving others can be physically and emotionally exhausting. You don't need me to tell you that. And coaches can often experience fatigue and anxiety because of that. If this is left unchecked, such experiences can reduce our passion and our motivation for our job. And if our passion and motivation is reduced, athletes start to suffer if this is the coach's experience. So the one thing that we're working to try and protect and evolve is damaged if we don't look after ourselves. So quality coaching requires mental, emotional, and physical conditioning. Coach wellness starts with an awareness of what are the common causes of stress. If we know what are the common causes of stress, we become risk averse to them, and we're more likely to stay part of our own holistic health package. So armed with this knowledge, coaches can and need to take steps to refresh and reload as and when needed to maintain their own health package. And so to summarize, these are areas that we often learn too late, that are more apparent now than ever before. An athlete's window of opportunity in this sport is small. They have a limited time in which to get it right. The chance of any of us finding our full potential in anything is highly challenging, whether that be sport, music, drama, academics, education, business, whatever it might be. So if their window of opportunity is small, it's even smaller when we think that all of the stars have to be aligned and all of the resources need to be right and the people working with them, they need to resonate with, etc., etc. So we have to endeavor to maximize everything that's positive around them, and we have to endeavor to minimize and ideally remove everything that isn't. Ultimately, we're looking to develop self-reliant, self-managed individuals if we go back to their superpowers. In terms of coaching tactics, there's a dichotomy around a term I use a lot, which is patient urgency, because that doesn't make sense. So we have to be patient because things don't fall into our lap. We have to be urgent because this window of opportunity is small. So there's a balance between the two, and we walk a tightrope between the two at all times. We have to embrace change, because if we don't, we accept stagnation, because the sport evolves. If we don't evolve with the sport leaves us behind. It's inevitable that there's going to be knockbacks. Athletes and coaches have to be able to dust themselves off and go again. It's part of mental resilience. And you as coaches can't expect a commitment without displaying it yourself. And last but not least, I believe in a coaching brotherhood or a coaching sisterhood. And that's healthy competition between us is by implication healthy, or it wouldn't be healthy competition. But we have to have each other's backs. we have to either physically or metaphorically, at least, put our arms around each other at times. Because if we don't, then who else is going to? So now that we've found each other, this is my social media if you want to keep in touch with the areas in which I work. And I'm more than happy now to take questions, and thank you for listening.
Great, thanks, Jon. So I'm going to ask, guys, if you would like to, we can open the floor, or you can stick your questions in the chat. Jon, I'm going to start with a question. What programs does your affiliation have in place to manage age group athlete mental health? Is there a program in place? Is it something in development?
Hi, sorry, yes. Well, we would, the area in which I specifically work would be in high performance. So in high performance, it's much more readily available to provide athletes with practitioners and support services that would come from an expert field. So in the areas of psychology or psychiatry, and particularly in life skills and lifestyle management, so that they're able to put the package of their life together more readily. In a club environment, we would have a youth development team that would put education seminars and opportunities for development amongst coaches and volunteers, and swimming teachers and committees. The wonder of Zoom that we've all learned about in these last 2 years, where I didn't even know Zoom call existed until the beginning of 2020, has meant that we're able to reach people so much more than we may have done in the past, and without people having to get in a car or jump on a train or jump on a flight. So I think that it's a case of using those tools and identifying some of the areas that we've spoken about today, and finding experts in their field where coaches and clubs can then be invited onto those kind of forums, and for those things to be discussed, but also for it to be a two-way street, because clubs and coaches need to be able to let people know what it is that they're seeing, or let the governing body know what it is that they're seeing, so that the governing body can then provide the correct kind of interventions to be able to support in those areas. But certainly around athlete mental health, return to training, of how coaches get athletes back in the water when maybe they haven't been in the water for a long time, how coaches might have used physical land conditioning during times when pools were closed. Some of those tactics around the things that are controllable, nutrition, staying on top of your schoolwork, staying on top of your sleep, preparing for when you can get back into something that's more regular, so that you're more fit for purpose. Those are the areas that we would have covered over the last 2 years. The other thing that we also put in place, which I thought was really good, was almost like an athlete skills and education program. So it was like coaching athletes on technique and skills around turns and starts and relay takeovers, but without a pool. So they were like online learning platforms with Q&A sessions where athletes could get certification for becoming an expert, in inverted commas, in freestyle technique, but without actually having to get in the water. So they could talk about how the hand goes in, where the head position is, the timing of the breathing. So almost like they were using a coaching language that then they could use as part of that self-regulation in their own heads. Because when an athlete's going down the pool, you want them to be able to say, is my hand going in correctly? Are my hips rotating? Is my head staying still? Am I breathing to the right as much as I'm breathing to the left? Or whatever it is that we think are good core elements that we want them to bring into their swimming. And that was hugely received. And we literally had hundreds and hundreds of kids across the country that engaged in that program. And we got coaches that were out of work at that time or were on furlough to deliver that, and paid them something to deliver it, you know, online. So Coach X would do freestyle, Coach Y would do breaststroke turns, and athletes could buy into a whole package over and if they did all of the elements, they got a bronze certificate, and if they did all of the elements plus, they got a silver, and if they did all of the elements plus, they got a gold. Now I don't know if we'll ever need that again, but certainly is something that we'd definitely roll out if we end up back in a position where, you know, we're not able to get our pools in again for a period.
I love that. I love that work. No, that sounds amazing. And thank you very much for your presentation. Very insightful, incredibly informative, exactly the kind of message I was looking forward to. I don't have any questions for you, Jon. I think you did, the presentation was pretty much self-explanatory. 2 more minutes, guys. Any questions? Just people loving your swimmer education.
Thank you, Dean.
Yeah, I know. Jon, that's it. I think we're all good.
All right. Well, I hope it was useful.
Incredibly useful. Incredibly useful. Thank you very much. This kind of message is particularly close to my heart. I think we need to be paying more attention to it. I think we need to be evaluating not only our mental health of our athletes, but I think that coaches neglect themselves and get neglected. And like you said, if we don't take care of ourselves, then we can't do our best in the interest of the athlete. So that's also an area that needs to be addressed, and coaches need to be mindful of those things.
For sure.
Once again, thank you very much, Jon. And hope we'll be in touch soon.
No problem. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good evening, guys.